Welcome back, folks. Episode 51 of the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. On this episode, we are speaking with Dan Mellinger of the Energy Futures Group. He is sort of like a consultant to utilities and institutions about their rebate programs. This was a pretty good, if you're into rebates, pretty good. It was a damn good conversation about rebates and how they work and what should be done, what are some of the best practices and what we should do in the future. So Dan, thank you for coming on the show. And also, I'd like to tell you that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the specification grade leaders of the lighting business. That's right. I'm talking Kurtzon. Go to KURTZON.com, baby. Kurtzon.com. That's Kurtzon Lighting. Greg, what do we got for these guys on Kurtzon today?
Oh, you're talking about specification grade. First of all, in addition to all the nice products they've offered, which we talk about in a lot of previous shows, they have one that I don't see a lot of people have and advertise specifically for. It's indoor sports troffers. So where do you run into those? At least where I've run into them is like a racquetball court or gymnasium, things like that. Sometimes they're recessed up in the ceiling, and there could be HID, they could be fluorescent. Oftentimes the lenses are damaged, the bulbs are broken, they're hard to replace. They actually make a built-in LED troffer just for that application. Like, who does that? Kurtzon does that. Specification
Kurtzon.com. Ooh. Love it. So go to KURTZON.com, baby. That's Kurtzon.com. And, if you really, it's funny how there's levels in this business and Kurtzon's at the top, folks. So if you need that good stuff, you know where to go to look for it. Kurtzon.com. And of course, this episode and every episode so far of the GetAGripOnLighting.com website page, whatever the hell you call that GetAGripOnLighting.com is brought to you by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. That's NAILD.org, baby. Check it out. Join us. But for right now, we got Dan Mellinger into rebates and all else on episode 51 of the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Say hi to Greg Garrick.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for coming on.
Dan, tell us a little bit about Energy Futures Group.
So Energy Futures Group is a small energy consulting firm located in Vermont. We have 7 staff, 5 of us located here in Vermont, and a couple others, one gentleman in Boston and one in New York. And we provide energy efficiency, renewable, and demand response expertise to clients throughout North America. I believe we're up around 30, where we work in around 30 states and 6 provinces. We do things like program design, market research, expert witness testimony, technology assessments, anything related to those broader topics of efficiency, renewables, and demand response.
Efficiency,
your clients are utility companies?
And demand response.
Is that correct? Utility
yes,
companies?
Greg.
Okay.
Well, utility companies, yes, but we also work with a number of government organizations. So sometimes it might be a public utility commission that oversees the utilities, or actual municipal governments themselves. And we do quite a bit of work with environmental advocates. So these might be organizations that want to see greater levels of energy efficiency and in a particular jurisdiction.
It's interesting. In Ontario, needs to use more energy, not less. We have too much energy in Ontario.
Do you have an energy surplus?
Yeah. Like energy efficiency is like seen as always a good thing, except when you have a surplus of energy from your nuclear reactors and your hydro, and you need to use more of it. So and it's interesting because I listened to a speech by the president of Ontario Power Generation, and he was saying that Ontario is the absolute number one place in North America for the adoption of electric vehicles. Because if Ontario adopted electric vehicles, the price of electricity would go down, because we would then be able to use all our own energy and we wouldn't have to pay to get rid of it. Is that the kind of stuff you're doing, Dan? Are you helping people implement those kinds of strategies?
A little bit. Your situation in Ontario, you're not the only area or state with that issue, but it is rather unique. More often than not, there's a greater demand for power than exists supply. But when there does exist a greater supply than demand, there are a lot of options that can be used to address that situation. And one of those is building demand, hopefully building smart demand through things like electric vehicles or transferring heating systems from fossil fuel based to heat pumps. And so building electrical load to match that supply surplus that you've got. Efficiency still can be part of the answer and should be part of the answer. I'll use Quebec as an example, a neighbor of Vermont's. They sell quite a bit of power into the States, and they also have a very aggressive energy efficiency program, and it's all driven from based on economics. They can reduce the consumption in the province with their customers through energy efficiency and turn around and sell that power to the States at a gain. So as long as the energy efficiency costs less than what they can sell the power to Vermont, New York, you name it, it's economically advantageous for them.
What are you doing
But
in the
just
lighting?
because you have a surplus of just because you have a surplus of power doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing efficiency, because there are always avenues to use or sell that power elsewhere.
What are you doing in the lighting space, Dan?
So lighting is my primary background. Prior to joining Energy Futures Group, I spent about 13 years planning and administering the commercial lighting programs at Efficiency Vermont. And so I built quite a bit of experience in the lighting industry. And as a result of that experience, it tends to be one of my primary areas of focus here at EFG. And so I'll work with utilities on designing new lighting programs. I do quite a bit of market research on quantifying the potential for various lighting technologies and savings opportunities, things like that.
I would say, Dan, you're with two guys right now that on this show have been consistently critical of those who design lighting rebate programs. So we've criticized you indirectly.
Well,
so
you may actually be in good company, because I've criticized quite a few lighting programs. Just because you have a lighting program doesn't mean it's designed well, and so we may have more in common than you think.
Okay, so tell me about the. Give me your opinion on the Save On Energy program in Ontario. Is it a good program?
You'll have to tell me a little bit about it.
Oh, okay. It's got a combination. I thought maybe you designed it or something. So no. Tell me a little bit.
I haven't done any work. I haven't done any work in Ontario, so I'm not sure.
Okay, so tell us then, and then I'll throw it over to Greg to ask a couple questions. But tell us what makes up a good energy efficiency rebate or incentive program. You're talking about incentive and rebates, right? Right, Dan?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Tell me in 2018, not in 2008, because you must have done some work with high bay fluorescence and CFLs back in the old days.
Yeah, absolutely. A whole lot of work with those high bay fluorescents for sure.
Sure. So did we. But let me ask you, what constitutes a solid, respectable, well-managed rebate program in 2018?
There are a lot of aspects there. Well managed is one piece of it. Regardless of the design that you've got for the program, managing that program within the constraints of funding that any particular utility or state has is really critically important. Every different utility or jurisdiction has a different funding mechanism, and ensuring that the program can be designed and managed such that those funds can be depended on consistently is really important from a market relationship standpoint. You've probably heard about the stories, or maybe even experienced it yourself, where the funds dry up mid-program year. Sometimes it's not calendar year, but midway through, the funds dry up, and you'll have projects that were already well along the way that now a potentially significant piece of funding has disappeared, and that project is going to die on the vine likely. So managing the program within the funding constraints that you have is critically important. And really that has, I shouldn't say nothing to do with program design, but it's kind of a separate issue. If you then look at program design, the typical programs that you'll see out there are things like a custom, or sometimes called calculated program, or a prescriptive program. Those are the two, kind of general, basic, common program designs that you'll see with almost every utility program. There's really nothing special or magical about them, and they have both their strengths and their weaknesses. But in 2018, we're seeing a trend towards system-based technologies, projects, and as a result, program designs really need to adapt, because a custom program might be able to accommodate those system-based designs, but custom tends to be very slow, and it's a black box to those on the outside. So you guys as distributors or contractors really don't know what you're going to get in terms of approval or dollar amount until it goes through the system, and you wait weeks or maybe months. And then prescriptive is really geared towards widgets, units, single fixtures, and not well suited to an LED system. And when I say system, I'm talking about luminaires, lamps, and controls all working together. So what I like to see is program designs that can accommodate these systems. And so some things are perhaps an emphasis on comprehensive lighting design. So engaging the lighting design community, and that doesn't necessarily mean a lighting designer, but encouraging comprehensive lighting design with all of the partners. So it could be a contractor, distributor, spec engineer, or lighting designer. Promoting controls, and that can be done using your typical prescriptive approaches, but maybe it's being strategic with your rebate level. So emphasizing a fixture that works with controls over just a standalone fixture. So go back to that high bay example.
You're saying a lot here. You're saying a lot. You're not giving a speech, Dan. It's a conversation. I'm joking with you, Greg. Right. I can looking at Greg here, and he wants to ask you questions. And go ahead, Greg. Ask Dan a question. I know you had a question there a while ago.
Yeah, no.
Give him a question.
That's all good.
I had a question about when you were saying you're switching from the black hole, which is custom, to the prescriptive. And so you're saying that the prescriptive is easier than the custom, but what are the problems with prescriptive? I can say I've said what I think the problems are with prescriptive. What do you think they are, Dan?
Yeah, well, you can find problems depending on your perspective. From the utility standpoint, prescriptive is your least accurate way to account for the energy savings, because you know so little about that project. So it's not as accurate as something like a custom program, and you're very reactive to what's happening in the market. These projects are already well along their way by the time you receive the paperwork, or most oftentimes finished. And so that's where you can run into problems with budget. If you set a prescriptive rebate that's inappropriate, or if product prices change rapidly in the market, a program can get inundated with rebates, and suddenly the funding dries up. From a market perspective.
Okay, let me ask you one question on that. So I've had situations in Ontario where my customers have received prescriptive rebates for increasing the energy use in their building. Like it actually, because it was technology based or something like poorly designed, they actually, ended up increasing the energy and still receiving the rebate.
Because they used a technology that used more power than what they had there before.
Yeah, exactly. The prescriptive incentive was just for, if you switch, this was back in the days of fluorescent, if you switch to T5 as opposed to T8, because back then T5 was hot.
Oh, right.
Right? And so use T5. T5 equals more efficient than T8. So if you switched whatever you had to T5, you got this rebate. And so people would say, okay, I want more light in my hallway and I want a rebate. So let's go with a 4-foot T5 instead of a 2-foot. And they had, 2 CFLs in the thing, and they take out the 2 CFLs and put in a 4-foot T5 at 28 watts. So instead of 26 watts, they're using 28.
That's certainly one of the problems of prescriptive programs, is the program has no engagement with the customer. It's all after the fact. And so you can have things like either intentionally or unintentionally overlit spaces that end up driving the power higher.
Yeah.
It really, adding light is one of the realities of the evolution of lighting technology all along the way. Every time lighting has evolved or made a step, we've introduced more light into our space.
Right. Why
building
change the
codes have
why
contradicted.
change the lights? Why change the lights if you're not going to have more light? Like that predominates a lot of projects, Greg, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, it's always an important aspect of it, for sure.
Right.
You want
so like why
the same
why
or
would you
more
do
light than you
yeah.
get.
Why would you change it if you're not going to have more light?
Yeah,
That's kind of like in the back of people's heads all the time.
Yeah, think about those warehouses or those industrial spaces that converted from HPS over to high bay fluorescent, and they were thrilled with the change in light level.
So you got three types. You got custom in Ontario. You have engineered, and then you have prescriptive. Right now, Greg, is it the same in Minnesota?
For ours, it's prescriptive, instant, or midstream. I don't know what terminology you guys are using, and then custom. Those are the three that we have, and that kind of relates to one of the questions I had. Is it important for utility companies to have multiple options, or is it better to have one? Pick one and stick with it.
No, it's critical to have multiple. There's no such thing as the singular or right solution for every customer. So as an example, Greg, you're in Minnesota, so you're likely in Xcel Energy territory.
Yes.
They do have a midstream program, and midstream programs are great at driving volume, increasing adoption of things like an LED troffer or an LED tube, and oftentimes without controls. And for a lot of customers, that might be the right solution. But it's also great to have a way for those customers to pursue maybe lighting design, or maybe a LED troffer system with connected or networked lighting controls. And that's not something you're going to get through a midstream program. You're going to get that either through a unique or a hybrid program design, or something like a custom calculated program.
Can you even measure or predict the energy savings from connected lighting controls or any kinds of controls really? But how do connected lighting controls actually reduce energy? I think you can do the same thing with a well-commissioned non-connected lighting control.
One of the biggest areas where connected lighting or network lighting controls purport to save energy is on a high-end trim. Dialing in the light level of what you've got to an appropriate light level. And sometimes I've argued that, well, high-end trim is just a solution to poor lighting design. If the light fixtures were specified with the right lumen package from the beginning, you wouldn't need to trim them down. And so, is that really energy savings, or is that just a solution to poor lighting design? It's debatable. Certainly, network lighting controls save energy through occupancy, turning the lights off, and daylight by dimming the fixtures down.
Yeah, but
and they can save more than your standalone.
Non-networked lighting controls do the same thing.
Yes, they can, absolutely. And so your increment of savings beyond those non-networked or standalone controls, there is a little bit more savings you can get by having them connected, because you can coordinate them, you can group them, you can zone them. So you can be more strategic or layer your strategies. So things like daylight control you can define how that control coordinates with certain fixtures. There is the opportunity for manual dimming as well, personal control, sometimes called scheduling. So as a coordinated system, it can certainly save more energy than standalone controls, but you're right that those standalone or non-network controls, occupancy and daylight can save a good amount of energy themselves.
No.
Go ahead, Greg. Yeah, I was trying to think.
Yeah,
of a question,
I just want to
point.
clarify. Yeah, so I want to clarify some terminology. So again, I mentioned that we have three. We have a prescriptive, which is you take out this, you put in this, you get this rebate. We have an instant rebate. Yep. I call it instant, where it's you give them a par lamp, par 38, and you get $5 back, and then you have a custom. Yeah. So what is midstream? Yep. Is midstream midstream prescriptive?
Midstream is what you're calling that instant rebate. Midstream implies that the rebate is being applied at the point of purchase, so a commercial distributor.
So what's the difference between, in Ontario, we have custom engineered, prescriptive, and then the instant rebate? Do you know what I mean when I say engineered custom?
Well, engineer and custom are often synonymous. So I'm not
Okay.
sure what you would mean if those are separate programs, but custom is meaning that there is some engineering calculation being applied to every project to quantify the
No,
savings.
custom would be like in Ontario. Custom would be like if you brought a new technology to the table and the utility wasn't aware about it. You would say, "Oh,
Okay.
I'm going to put a computer program on all these forklift charging stations, so that instead of hitting, because you know how they charging forklifts, it goes to 3 amps each and then tails off. Instead of all of them
Yep.
going to 3 amps each right away, this one would go to turn on at 7:30. This one would turn on at 7:45. This one would turn on at 8. This one would turn on at, you know what I mean? So you stage the engagement of the charging of the forklift at the end of the day, and it reduces the overall peak load that the building has by, say, 20 kilowatts.
Yep.
That would be a custom. Engineer would be like, okay, I'm taking out 400 halides. There's 40 of them in the space, and I'm only going to put in 21 LEDs because it's not designed properly. That would be engineered. And then prescriptive would be, well, if you take out those 40 halides and you put in 40 LEDs, you get this much per LED.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the programs in the States called what you're referring to is engineered, call that a custom program.
Okay.
And for the new technologies that sort of don't fit within any other box, so to speak, sometimes those go through a custom program. Sometimes programs will have something called emerging technologies. It's unfortunate that the nomenclature isn't consistent across utilities, states, or clearly countries.
Yep, it's Canadian for custom, in other words. So another question I have in terms of rebate programs, I'll tell you my point too, but are they designed to be complex? Because I think that gives us an advantage as a distributor knowing the programs. But is it better for them to make it easy for their end users, or is it better to keep it complex and have somebody who knows the technology involved in it?
Greg, it's both. It's better to be easier in order to increase participation. Ultimately, that's what the utilities are after, is increasing adoption of a particular technology to save energy. So if it's overly complicated and people don't adopt this stuff, they've not gained anything. The problem is every one of these, or most of them, are regulated by a public utility commission or something similar to that. And these utility programs are scrutinized on the energy saving claims. And so that's where the complexity comes in. They're trying to cover themselves to make sure that the rebates that they pay are they're going to be able to claim the energy savings. And if they don't collect the proper information or ensure that the rebate is being paid for a technology that's replacing something inefficient, the energy savings might not actually be realized. So it's this delicate balance of making it simple or easy, but ensuring that the savings are defensible and legitimate.
How many utility companies do you work with, or have you worked with?
Me personally, dozens. EFG, my company, would be in the hundreds. We work with a lot of utility companies, or at least in a lot of markets in which utility companies work. Sometimes we're not hired directly by the utility.
So in your opening salvo, you said that you also provide expert witness testimony.
That's right.
Can I ask you, and then you just used the words defensible and legitimate. So clearly there are goals. Now and that these goals, whatever, the president of Toronto Hydro, say, or the president of Xcel Energy, he says, okay, I paid out $10 million in rebates. What do I got for it? And he's like, well, the load's still the same. The load's still the same in Minnesota. So why did I pay $10 million? And then he turns to his chief operating officer and goes, fire that guy down on the rebate place. He ain't doing stuff. And the chief operating officer says, hey, they just built 10,000 more homes in Minnesota, man. So, or in Minneapolis. So we have this consistently increasing load, and we've actually been able to reduce it because even though there's growth in the economy and this sort of stuff, you still save because of XYZ. How do you prove or measure and verify the savings of these monster programs. They're so huge. And then like in a province like Ontario or a city like Toronto, I mean, you have homes being built everywhere, condos going up, you got, all sorts of different things going on. And then you got this efficiency program that's trying to drive down that energy. How do you guys go about proving this stuff?
Yeah, well, you used a couple of words that are really important: measure and verify. In almost every case, after a program year closes, there is a measurement and verification activity that takes place by an independent party. So this will be an engineering firm that's hired separate and independent from the utility to come in and look at a program level, a portfolio level, or even sometimes a project level, especially for those big projects, to review the calculations and the energy savings claims. There's also quite a bit of work that happens on the front end, especially for programs like a Midstream, a point of purchase program, and a prescriptive program, because those are all based on assumptions. So for example, with lighting, it's important to understand wattage and hours or runtime. And for a prescriptive program, most of that is based on assumptions. And a program has to be very careful about the assumptions that are applied to a program, so that when measurement and verification comes later, they don't lose, so to speak, the energy savings that they thought they were capturing for the given dollar. Now, in terms of the budget, which you mentioned, all of that is typically set by a legislature or some other government body, and the utility will then be responsible for implementing the programs within that budget.
Okay, so it's interesting that you can manipulate various numbers on a lighting proposal to somebody to make the savings go higher, make the rebate go higher, like change the hours of operation a year, raise the average kilowatt hour rate, and it shows, hey, it's not a 2-year payback, it's a 1-year payback, but I'm going to use 21 cents a kilowatt hour, which is not true, right? So, but it's interesting that the utilities are subject to the same problem. If you're assuming the wrong assumptions, then you're not getting what you were supposed to be getting and paying for.
Yep, absolutely. And all of these technologies, not just lighting, but every technology that a utility promotes has to be proven to be cost effective. And that cost effectiveness analysis is based on a lot of assumptions about how much technology is going to be used, the cost of the technology. Talk about a challenging thing to assume is, what does this stuff cost? It's all over the map, the costs. It's constantly moving. So it's a very challenging thing to do, both proving that measures or technologies are cost effective and then defending the associated energy savings.
So out of the utilities that you've worked with and you've initially approached them, if you could give a percentage, what percentage of them had a good system to begin with?
A good system, you mean like a program design?
Sorry, rebate program. Yeah, stick to lighting rebate program. Let's say that.
Yeah, for what I would consider to be good program designs, I can probably count them on one hand. And it really depends on somebody at the utility having both knowledge about lighting technology and, maybe more important, knowledge about the way the market works. When you get utilities who design programs that don't have a good understanding of how the supply chain works, how products are sold in the commercial market, or knowledge about the technology, you can end up with some program designs that just don't work.
Or what price things are, because a lot of times I've had situations where the rebate is higher than the price, and they cap it, so then you have to sell it for X amount to get the rebate.
We actually created our own rebate program once. We called it the free fixture deal. And we actually made up like sheets that you would fill out and everything. It was like a sales pitch, right? But because a prescriptive rebate was so high for one particular type of technology, we ended up going around and saying, yeah, there's a rebate program. It's called the free fixture deal, and you get free fixtures if you qualify. And we actually had our own forms and everything, and then we took those forms and went and made the application to the utility, because it was just so ridiculously high for this one, and they had it for so long that the price kept falling on this technology to the point where we could just give them away for free with installation. And that wasn't the goal of the program.
Yep. And then you get all kinds of things like products being installed where they shouldn't be because it was free. So
Yeah,
why
exactly.
not?
Yeah. Everyone,
you get
if
overlighting.
if you had this type of technology, you're getting this fixture, period, end of story. It was real simple to train your sales guys. If it's round, you point to that. If you see something in the ceiling and it's round, this is what they're doing. Period, end of story.
I remember a project where a customer, because the exterior rebate was so lucrative, the customer bought wall packs at little to no cost and used them in a hallway. They turned them upside down as an indirect and used them in the hallway. Right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's crazy. But you know what it is? The problem is that the problem with these utilities, Dan, is they're swimming in the shark tank, bro. Like it's like the first a new rebate program comes out, give it that thing. So like as an Ontario citizen, I'm like, hey, take it easy with these rebate programs. Cancel every other one that's not lighting. But then when I put on my, lighting hat, it's like, ooh, this looks good. Ooh, look at that one. Look at that measure. That looks nice. It's like they're like, oh, okay, we did our market research. It took 2.5 years, and now we're ready to release our program. And here you go, guys. And the sharks just circle and circle in the blood and the water. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, and some of these people chase those rebates, right? They don't just work in the market where they live. Where they're legitimately literally are rebate chasers, where they'll find the most lucrative deal and go chase it.
I've never had to leave Ontario. It's always been this way, like since 2004. It's like someone's going to come slip my throat in a dark alley in Ontario for all the stuff I've said about Ontario and just how, the rebate guys are going to cut us off down here. But, here, I want to ask you a question. Dan, when I was talking, I was thinking about, hey, well, how would how could you get connected lighting? Wouldn't it be interesting if you could somehow incorporate a device which measured the actual consumption of energy at each device, and then, had like a watt meter in it or an amp meter in it, was measuring it continuously throughout the course of the month. And then all of the devices in the building were connected, and then the utility knew which devices in that building were actually using the energy. And then base the rebate program of IoT on, okay, here's what I'd like you to be able to do. If you install a connected lighting system or a connected system, I want you to integrate that connected system into this portal so I know how much energy each of the lights in your building are using, and we can then incent you to stop using this one or that one if possible. Like, wouldn't that be the best sort of, from a lighting perspective, or the most obvious use of connected lighting?
Absolutely. Right. And many of us in the industry are working towards that. There are a number of connected lighting technologies that have that capability today. Some systems don't measure energy, and even if they have a dashboard, it might be based on a simple math calculation. Count up the number of fixtures and multiply by 50 watts or whatever.
No, I want to know what that one is using exactly.
Exactly. Right. And so there are systems that have a CT measuring the current at every fixture, every device, and can report that. And from a utility standpoint, you're right. That is the dream, to get this reported energy use. There are certainly challenges with that. Number one is data privacy. Like, how do you make this data available in a portal that the utility has access to, and ensure that it's secure? You remember the Target breach that happened through HVAC connected technology. And so as soon as you open up your connected lighting beyond your intranet, making it available to the utility, it's a potential point of weakness.
Oh, look at my brain. My brain just blew up on something. Okay, no, listen. We just had an election in the local municipal elections in Ontario, and everybody went and voted for the mayor and the regional councillor and blah, 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 blah. And we were having a chat in the office about, hey, why can't you just vote online? Come on, man. What's this stupid going down there? Now, they know that around the world, the most secure elections are ballot box elections, right? There's nothing that needs to be secure more than elections and democracies, right? There's nothing that needs to be more secure. So I say this, Government, figure out how you can make secure online elections, and then we'll use that technology everywhere else.
Amen. All right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if they could do that, then whatever the blockchain or whatever it is, Bitcoin blockchain, whatever that stupid stuff is so secure. All you do is invest in these databyte bits in the internet and you make money, and nobody could ever rip you off because it's in a blockchain. I don't even know how that stuff works. But if you had something that was ultra secure like that you could run the U.S. presidential election on, well, then certainly that technology would work for the utility, no?
Yeah, well, that seems like a good avenue for you to pursue, and then you won't even need to do this lighting stuff anymore.
Well, the obvious thing is if we could just make clean electricity, who cares, right?
Sure.
So
one of the other problems with this idea of energy monitoring is when you pay the rebate. And some of the programs have adapted to that by saying, okay, if we have a way to measure and verify your actual energy use, we'll pay you something up front. Call it 60-70% of the rebate, and hold something back until we can verify. It's often called a pay-for-performance program, and it works.
Does any jurisdiction have it? Does any jurisdiction have that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are quite a few pay-for-performance programs. Not always for lighting. I don't know of any pay-for-performance program that's specific to lighting, but certainly a number of utilities are using pay-for-performance, especially on larger projects where you just don't have a good sense of how much energy savings are possible. So you pay something up front and the balance once it's verified.
Have you ever told any utility company to discontinue their lighting rebate program altogether?
Well, not their entire lighting rebate program. I've told utilities to discontinue things like CFLs or linear fluorescent.
Sure.
There are some utilities who are getting out of the commercial lighting game. They have this unfortunate perception that lighting is coming to an end. They've seen things like the legislation for screw-base bulbs, and they've assumed wrongly that applies to commercial lighting. And while it does, certainly commercial lighting uses the screw-base bulbs. It's a pretty small share of the installed stock out there. There's just so much to do on the commercial side in terms of product adoption.
And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I read your DLC report that you presented in July. Unfortunately, we couldn't be out at that conference, but you wrote that by 2020, a majority of the residential utility programs will be gone because a lot of that base will be installed because of standards and things. But the commercial and industrial programs will be strong still because there's still going to be a lot of potential there. Can you explain your forecast for that and what you foresee?
Yeah, so the legislation that affects the screw-base bulbs is called ISA, the Energy Independence and Security Act. And by 2020, the screw-base bulbs sold must achieve at least 45 lumens per watt. And so that pushes you to either a CFL or LED, and no one's installing CFL anymore, so essentially everything becomes LED. Now, I believe Canada has already adopted this standard ahead of the US, and so you may, in Ontario, Michael, you may be already experiencing this, but by 2020, it might be a little bit of a lag depending on how fast things move through the supply chain. You won't be able to buy an incandescent or halogen screw-base bulb. And so there'll be no need for a utility or little need for a utility program at that point. But on the commercial side, those products only account for about 10% of the installed stock. Most of what we have on the commercial side is linear. It could be a linear fluorescent, could be a troffer, a high bay, or all the linear form factors that we have for LED now, and a whole bunch of outdoor products, HID, be it high pressure sodium or metal halide. Now on the outdoor side, in commercial, LEDs made quite a bit of headway already, and so we're up somewhere around 30-35% market penetration of the installed stock. But on the indoor linear side, we're still single digits. And so there's just a huge volume of potential retrofits.
Hang on one second.
Yeah.
You're saying you're still in single digits for linear fluorescent?
conversion of linear fluorescent to LED.
I would say it's like 40-50% in Ontario. I would say it's way higher than that. But I mean, I have no idea.
Where do you
This is
get
just
your numbers?
anecdotal. It's just anecdotal for me.
Yeah. So where do you get your numbers or your stats?
Well, before I talk about where those numbers come from, I will say it's sometimes hard to believe that information because I live in Vermont, and Vermont's a very progressive state, so we've seen a lot of adoption. So similarly, I look around and think we can't be less than 10% adoption, and maybe that's true in a situation like Vermont or Ontario, but nationwide, in the U.S., Navigant for the Department of Energy performs something called a lighting market characterization, where using a number of data sources, they try to estimate how many of every single lighting technology exists out there amongst commercial and industrial customers, and residential for that matter. And as best as we can tell, the adoption as of 2017 for converting a linear anything, T12, TA, T5 to LED, was somewhere around 6 or 7%.
The party's going to continue.
So that includes all. Yeah, exactly. It is not over. And if you're in an area that's progressive, Minnesota does a lot, or Ontario, it sounds like. But if you go to other areas like the southeastern United States, it's just not happening there. And there's a huge population base in these areas.
Greg, we're moving to Florida. We're moving to Louisiana.
Southeast. Let's do it.
But
New Orleans, baby.
Well, the opportunities may be there, but the rebates aren't.
Yeah, but you don't even need a rebate if you know how to sell an energy efficient. Well, I guess maybe the energy cost is very low in those jurisdictions as well.
Well, it can be, but not everywhere. South Carolina, for example, has pretty high power costs. But you're right. In a lot of projects or cases, you don't need that rebate to sell these technologies. Either the payback is sufficient by itself, or there are other benefits that can help the sale.
Now, I know this can vary by utility, but we get asked this question from our customers all the time. So if there's a way you can generalize across all utility companies, when somebody says, where does the rebate money come from? How do you answer that?
Yeah, everyone. The rebate funding is collected from everyone's utility bill. Sometimes it's called out on a line item, so you can see it. It'll be called something like an energy efficiency charge or system benefit charge, a couple percentage points. And it goes into a pot of money.
In Ontario, it's called global adjustment, and it's like 3 times the cost of energy. It's like the cost of energy will be like 4 cents. The cost of energy will be like 3 cents or 3.5, and the global adjustment will be 9 cents.
Wow. Yeah. And that's a unique example. Typically, the cost of the energy efficiency line item is quite a bit less than the energy cost. But that then goes into a pot of money that is available for administering the efficiency programs.
Doesn't that sound a little bit like a Bob and Roode program?
I heard you mention that earlier. I can't remember the guest you were talking to, but the reverse Robin Hood, right?
Cost.
Yeah, the reverse Robin Hood. Rob from the poor and give to the rich.
Right. So there are some quite a few metrics or criteria applied to utility programs to ensure that doesn't happen. Almost every utility program has a low-income focus where they have to prove that a certain percentage of the spending went to low-income customers. So you can't just collect the funds from the low-income and use those on all the quick and easy projects like your large commercial. You just can't do it. There's also often a firewall between the funds that are collected from residential customers and commercial, so that what you collect from residential has to be turned around and used for those residential customers. So there are some protections to ensure that it's not a reverse Robin Hood.
But don't rich people have greater access to energy efficiency due to their wealth and knowledge and everything else, and then poor people have? I still think there are, like, in retrospect, for me in Ontario, the last 15 years with the Green Energy Act and all this sort of stuff. Now, that, just to preface that global adjustment, it also includes wind, solar, and nuclear, paying for the excess cost of those. And Ontario is like a very low carbon electricity jurisdiction. So like I think it's 90% or 95% of our electricity is non-carbon based. But anyway, I still think there are ethical dilemmas. Have you ever heard these seriously raised in your time in this industry?
The ethical dilemma about the efficiency programs benefiting
like
the
rate
rich more so than
basing
the
it.
poor?
The rate base. It's based on the rate base, right? So you pay a rebate of $50,000 to this high end manufacturing company that does millions and millions of dollars in sales, and say, look, here's $50,000 or $150,000 or $280,000 or $750,000 to upgrade a lighting system that's a 1-year payback on its own. Now we turned it into a 6-month payback for you. And we're going to take that $750,000. We're going to amortize it over 5 years, and we're going to charge it back to the rate base. There's an ethical dilemma there, I think. Would you not agree?
I agree, but I don't think it's quite as dramatic as you described. A lot of commercial and industrial customers pay in more than they get back in rebates. And so those funds are being distributed to other customers. It's pretty rare that industrial or large commercial is going to recuperate more than what they've paid into the energy efficiency fund. And part of that is just the fact that, well, not 100% of the funds go to rebates. There's things like administration costs and I mentioned the independent measurement and verification activity. All of that is paid for out of the same pot of money.
What percentage is that usually?
But the point is,
what percentage is it?
What percent goes to rebates?
Yeah, like if $100 in rebates, let's say there's $100 in the pot, then what percentage of that $100 is rebate paid out to the final client or it's probably different in each jurisdiction. But let me ask it this way then: what's the worst percentage you've seen, and what's the best percentage you've seen?
Well, what happens? I haven't looked at those percentages, so it'd be hard to say. But I can tell you that some programs do a poor job of keeping their administration costs down, which means that percentage is going to get out of whack, paying a lower portion of a lower percentage towards the rebates, giving it back to the ratepayers, as opposed to the salaries and everything associated with energy, with administering the program. And in fact, a lot of programs now will have a criteria that they have to meet in terms of administration costs in order to qualify for what's called a shareholder incentive. All of these utilities, or most of the utilities, are investor owned, and the way they get compensated for administering these programs is having some kind of performance bonus. They have to prove that they're keeping their administration costs in check in order to qualify. In some cases, not all cases.
Wouldn't that lead to lower measurement and verification?
No, the measurement and verification, budget or activities are handled separately from the utility. Otherwise, you would have bias. If the utility is also responsible for funding and running that measurement and verification activity, I would think you wouldn't have quite the scrutiny that you do now.
I don't think so. You up, Grady?
Yeah, so I think I know the answer to this, but do lighting rebate programs always make sense for both the end user and the utility company?
No. You'll have a lot of cases of unintended consequence where, like we talked about earlier, the rebate floats up or the product prices are dropping, and you end up incenting products that you don't intend to. From a utility standpoint, lighting is definitely the cheap and easy technology. It's easy to understand. Customers see it. It's tangible. And when I say cheap, generally the cost per unit savings, cost per kilowatt hour for the utility is on the low end, as opposed to something like a HVAC technology might be more expensive for the utility to administer.
And do you think as a whole lighting rebate programs will be around for the next 10 years, 20 years, forever? What do you say?
I think we're good for at least 10 years on the commercial side. We are up against, the utilities will be up against, adoption of this stuff is going to start to happen regardless of the incentive, like Michael mentioned. And at some point, the utility commissions are going to say that, hey, utility, you're no longer providing the motivation this adoption, and so therefore you shouldn't get credit for it. And that's already happened in a number of areas, and eventually it'll catch up with other aspects of lighting.
So I love doing this show because I'm such a loudmouth, and I shoot my opinions around, and people listen to them, and they're like, "A Colgan guy, so freaking loudmouth, buddy. I love your show." But I feel like I was corrected on my Bob and Rude statement from one of my other podcasts. So if I may, and I love it when I get corrected. I love it when I learn. That's why I do the show. That's why we started the show. So you're saying that normally a utility program would separate the commercial from the residential clients, and the charges would be different, and the rebate programs would be different. So the commercial, hey, if you're running a business, if your kilowatt hour consumption of the business is above 100 kilowatts a month, you're in this class and you pay this, and so this rebate program is for you, and so on and so on. You're saying there's a lot of that going on out there?
Oh, absolutely. That's very common. The percentage that are the percent that's collected based on your energy consumption is almost always different for residential versus commercial versus industrial. And then the programs are very often combined within those market segments. So you can't collect from industrial customers and use that to administer a residential program, usually.
Dan, I stand corrected. I love it. We got a lot of distributors.
Right.
We got a lot of distributors and contractors out there listening to this, and we've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that you would like to say to them in your final words here about rebates or anything like that?
So I have a certain soft spot in my heart for distributors. I worked closely with a lot of distributors when I was administering programs at Efficiency Vermont, and contractors, and these people are really the key to programs, and they don't get enough credit. Without the distributors or contractors, you can't administer a program. And so when we're talking about a good versus bad program, very often a bad program doesn't recognize the value that these trade allies play, or is not designed to take advantage of the skill sets that they have. You guys know the customers, you know the technology, so why not take advantage of that?
Thank you for coming on. Totally. Thank you for coming on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, Dan.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
What? Kurtzon.com, baby. That's KURTZON.com. That's Kurtzon.com. What are we saying about Kurtzon? Specification grade, bro. They're at the top. They can do it right.
A lot of times that says it all right there, that they can actually make specific product for specific applications, and they do that better than anyone else. They're made in the USA, owned by a family-owned company, and they've been around for over 100 years. That's intense, man. And the product that we're talking about today is their indoor sports troffer. Now can be put in a racquetball court or gymnasium where they a lot of times have lay-in fixtures, and they fluorescent or HID. You put this LED in, it's all built in. It's nice looking, upgrades the space, gets it modern, and fits the application they need for that specification. That's what Kurtzon does for you.
Yeah, they make a lot of products. So you go to Kurtzon.com. If there's a box to check, they've checked it. Legit warranty. American company. You nailed all the boxes, Greg. That's KURTZON.com, baby. Kurtzon.com. And of course, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. The original and best. I don't know if they're original. No, the IES a little bit older than nailed. But they're up there, 1977, 40 years. They're same age as me, 41. So go to NAILD.org if you want to join us. That's right, NAILD.org, baby. And of course, Dan, hey, what a conversation. That was fun as heck. Don't you agree, Greg?
Yeah, it was a great conversation on important topics that we all count on with rebates and how they do the program. So it was awesome to have them on.
Yeah, Dan, thank you for coming on the show. We appreciated it. I didn't realize how much you knew. You were actually a pretty smart guy. And I believe it now. Dan, thank you for coming on the show. It was really great talking. You know what's weird is like there's a whole other business of managing rebate programs that you and I know nothing about. We only know how to manipulate them. It's like a cat and mouse game. It's like this cat and mouse game between guys like Dan Mellinger and guys like us. Like, oh, you want to do that? Okay. And then it comes over here. It's like, ooh, look at this one. No, but Dan helps
That's right.
utilities out. Yeah, those guys help utilities out and help institutions out with their rebate programs. So you can check out all his social media and all their website stuff will be on our website. So go check it out there. If not, right now, 51. We're in the second half, folks, of the first 100 episodes. 51. Get a grip on lighting. Yeah.
Written on the rectory wall, there's a sign there for all. You are lost, Lord is there to find you.